Good morning, family. Good to see you today. It is a Wednesday, May 27th, 2020. Happy to see all of you, all your bright and shining faces. Quick side note, I saw Zeandre out in the real world yesterday as I was going to the corner store. Yeah, that's the ticket. I was going shopping. Anyways, it was good to see Zeandre. I was really happy to see him. Glad that he was doing okay. He's all smiley and happy, so that's always good. And he was with his cousin, also a Job Corps person, so that was a lot of fun. Um, what's going on? We're gonna do word of the day, and we're gonna have an. I'm gonna make an hour-long video, and then I'm gonna make a quiz, and I'm gonna submit it. That's my job today. As I've finished cleaning up everyone should have no more permissions problems. Everything should be perfect now. Everybody can log into any of the quizzes, log into any of the tests, and do the tests to their heart's content. Oh, and we have two new students today, Elizabeth and Lisvet and Mr. Santiago. I forget his first name. But first, a reading from our gospel, the book of CDX Automotive. I'll be reading today from Glossaries 1178, 1179. That's my cat howling. One of them. Wait. Oh, there you are. Hi. Get your feet off the tables. And stop slumping in your chairs. Everybody, sit up properly. Don't slump. Slouching is bad. Shoulders back, chin up. So, we talked about advanced mechanism yesterday. To aerate. Well, that's an easy one. Meow. To aerate is to fluff up fluid so that air bubbles get trapped in it, specifically oil. You aerate oil. Why is this a thing? All right. For those of you who don't know anything about engines yet, this will be a little bit confusing, but bear with me. I'm going to explain aeration to you. And it can occur in several locations. But primarily, what we talk about when we talk about aeration is we're talking about aerating the oil, engine oil specifically. Engine oil that's in the crankcase. That's the area and location in the oil pan. This is the engine. The crankcase is the lower part where the crank spins. And underneath the crankcase, there's the oil pan. Now, when we do oil changes, we always go to the oil pan and we loosen the nut. We take the nut out, and all the oil falls out, pours out. The oil is there so that the oil pickup tube has a place to sip all the oil out from the bottom and then reintroduce it up top under pressure. And the oil falls back down through the engine systems, falling back down into the oil pan again. What happens if there's not enough oil in the engine? Lubrication stops. Oil stops getting pushed to the rod bearings, the journal bearings on the crank. The oil doesn't make it up into the head where it lubricates the valves, the sleeves, the guides, the tappets, the HLAs, which is a hydraulic lift actuators, which is like a bucket system for a liquid-filled bucket system for camshaft lobes interacting with the valve stems. The oil can't travel up into your VTEC actuators. There's no oil pressure. You don't get the incredible boost of VTEC, right? So oil starvation doesn't just deal with not having lubrication for the pistons going up and down in an engine, but it takes other systems offline too. So always making sure you have the right amount of oil in an engine is critical and key. That being said, the idea that, just put in a couple more quarts, it'll be fine, the engine will use it, is very dangerous for modern engines. Old-timey engines, the RPM levels never got high enough to really froth out the oil. I had a Pontiac 455 Super Duty that was all in by 4,800 RPM. And even if you had an extra quart or two of oil in there, that'd get a little bubbly, but it wasn't crazy. That being said, modern engines are built in tolerance much higher now. The tolerances are much tighter, and so oil needs to perform flawlessly. So if you have an oil pan that takes 4 quarts of oil, and that's it, so that when you pull out the oil checking dipstick and it falls within the hashed areas of the measuring zone, and it's right almost at the top of that, it's perfect. It means the oil lever in the oil pan is a perfect amount so that the oil pickup tube has plenty to pull from and lubricate the engine. A lot of people think, well, if that's the right amount, then a little bit more would be perfect. And this is where aeration becomes a problem. Aeration has nothing to do with there not being enough oil. It has to do with there being too much oil. So much so that when the level of oil starts to rise up out of the oil pan, right, you keep adding oil, you just keep adding oil and keep adding oil until the oil level reaches the bottom of the crankshaft's throw. In other words, you have the front of the crankshaft, the wheel, and then you have the crankshaft itself, where each of the armatures that comes out, like the pedals on your bike, where the connecting rods connect, that throw, that piece of steel going out from the center line of your crank, when that spins around like a pedal and it smacks into the oil, because the oil's gone up from the oil pan up into where the crank is now operating, where those pedals are spinning, the crank throw, as it spins and smacks into the oil, causes the oil to splash, and the splashing causes bubbles. Most of the time, okay, a little bit of windage loss of power is acceptable in old-timey engines as the crankcase smacks into the oil at a decent amount of speed. You're losing a little bit of power because your crankcase needs to power, your crankshaft needs to power through the oil. And you guys know you lose a little bit of power when any solid object travels through a liquid. Just stand in a pool and try to wave your hand around. That's resistance, right? When it really starts to get high RPMs, that's when the metal is hitting the oil at such a speed that it causes crazy amounts of water, of oil slap and foam formation, and it aerates. Aerate means to make bubbles, and it makes little bitty air bubbles inside of the oil. Now, most of the time, the oil with the oil bubbles would just chill out in the oil tray and the air bubbles would go away. But if you make enough air bubbles so that all of the oil in the oil tray has air bubbles in it, the oil pump will no longer function properly because it's not getting solid oil, which is how it uses Pressurized oil, remember, you can't compress liquids. Liquids are not, for the most part, I know there are some exceptions to the rule, exceptions to the rule. But 99% of all liquids are not compressible at all. They have zero compressibility. The matrix of a liquid is set so that you can't squeeze it any harder. You can put it under pressure, but the volume of the liquid doesn't change. It just stays that size and you pressurize it. Because you can't compress a liquid, when you draw a liquid up like a straw, you can clamp over. Guys ever clamp over the end of a straw and it keeps the liquid in there? That's because liquid itself also has a level of what we call surface tension. And that surface tension in the liquid keeps the air from going up through it, through the straw, up to where your thumb is, and allowing the liquid to come out. If you release the differential of air pressure pushing up under the oil and the air pressure pushing on my thumb, you release it, the pressure differential goes away and the oil can slip back down because it's a solid column of liquid. But if I take aerated oil, put it in my straw, put my thumb over it, what would happen is the little bitty bubbles of air that are trapped inside my oil would move around, touch each other, and become slightly bigger bubbles to the point where it would ruin the surface tension at the face of the oil where it meets the air. And it would allow oil to gloop and glurp out the bottom of the straw until there was no oil left in my straw. Even more importantly, trying to get frothed up oil using suction, like a straw, to pull up into your tube when it's aerated is almost like trying to, a perfect example. Who here has ever tried to suck on soda with a broken straw? What, kitty? Jeez, he's a love. You want to get down? All right, well, come here. I'm talking first to my students, okay? Yeah, I have to teach. So, guys, you guys know how difficult it is to try to, even when the brake's on the bottom side, because it sucks in a little bit of air that aerates your soda even more, and it's almost impossible to draw a vacuum. Because of that same physical limitation, the engine oil pumps cannot properly circulate aerated oil. Can't pull it up the draw tube, can't create enough vacuum to pull it up into the draw tube. And when it tries to compress the oil to push it into the system, I shouldn't say compress the oil, when it tries to pressurize the oil to push it into the system to give us, 60, 70, 80, 90 psi of working oil pressure, it doesn't, because the air acts like a shock absorber and it absorbs all of that compression, that pressure. Much the same that brakes don't work when you get bubbles in the brake line. That's why we bleed brakes, because if there's air bubbles in there when we stomp on the brake pedal, aerated brake fluid compresses. The bubbles act like little sponges. They expand and contract. They move back and forth. And so because of this, engine oil, when it becomes aerated, when you've added too much oil and he's really complaining. And when you add too much oil and it aerates, the oil pickup tube cannot pressurize it properly. I keep wanting to say compress, but that's not it. Wants to pressurize it properly, wants to push it down the other end of the hose, and it won't properly lubricate the engine. and you end up with engine damage. For those of you kids who've ever played with water hoses, you guys know that if you take a water hose and you loop it and you leave it out in the yard for a couple of days, you go back on and you turn the water hose back on and you hold the end, it'll go all those air bubbles come pushing out because air bubbles had gotten in and they'd crept into the hose as it's been looped around flat on the ground. All the water didn't drain out, but there were air pockets. And that air pockets, even though you have a solid location, it's still pushing all those air pockets out. You don't get a solid stream of water. Same in an engine. You won't get a solid stream of oil. And you end up with air pockets in places where you can't have air pockets. It'll damage the engine. Everything from superchargers to main bearings, journal bearings at the engine crank. You starve those with oil, you spin the bearings. They'll scoff up and they'll spin, and you've just given yourself a $2,000 paperweight. So engine oil aeration is a huge issue, as well as aerating the oil in brakes. Guaranteed to give you a high pucker factor when you stomp on the brakes and there's nothing there. You're doing 70 miles an hour because you're feeling cool and you're coming up on your exit ramp and you push down with all your might in that big middle pedal and there's nothing there. I guarantee you your heart's doing, doom, 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 doom. And then you say something and then you do the something. Oh, and then smash. Because no brakes is not a fun thing. Not coming off the highway, it isn't. I haven't done it, but I've been in a car that has. We had to do some emergency swerving and rank up on that emergency brake, stick it in the first gear, and money shifted on purpose. Downshift on purpose. So that is why aeration is bad in cars. What else do we got? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go let the kitty out, but you don't even know. I'm coming. He hears his name. All right. So where were we? One thing turned into another. Aerate. To put the bubbles into fluid. To blow bubbles in fluid. Mucho bad for automotive motor. Let's go to the next word, shall we? A reading from our Gospels. CDX Automotive. A reading today from Glossaries 1178, 1179. A passage concerning after top dead center. Ooh. And the next word is going to be aftermarket. And then the last one is air checking. We'll do all those today. We'll do a couple. Or should we do so many? No. Let's just do after top dead center, which follows after yesterday's amazing video I made concerning how timing is done on cars for the ignition systems, and the old-timey distributor cap and rotor system. And during that talk, we spoke about two of the positions that mechanics will use when working on engines. One is top dead center, and the other is bottom dead center. Top dead center is when the piston, whichever piston that you want, most of the time they're talking about the number 1, but it can be for any of the pistons. If you're talking about valving and making sure that valves open up and close at the right time, and checking to make sure the Each cylinder is addressed accordingly, each by each. Top dead center is when the piston, alarm, get back to work, is when the piston gets to the top inside the cylinder, and the connecting rod, which usually operates like my elbows going around in a circle and my hands going up and down like it's the piston. Top dead center is when the piston gets to the top, like top of the screen, and then the elbow, which is the connecting rod, becomes perfectly vertical. It becomes perfectly vertical. At that moment, the piston is considered top, and the connecting rod is called dead centered. It's not to the left, it's not to the right, perfectly dead center underneath. Bottom dead center is the same thing, where the piston's at its bottommost position of the stroke. The connecting rod underneath it that connects it to the crankcase is not left or right of center line. It's the connecting rod is perfectly centered. Bottom dead centered. Top dead center, bottom dead center. So if we talk about after top dead center, we're talking about when the piston is at its topmost position as the crankcase rotates in its normal rotation. Some engines it's clockwise, other engines it's counterclockwise. You got to find out what your motor is doing, what direction is it normally rotating for its normal cycles, for the 4 cycles. And some are rotating clockwise, some rotate counterclockwise. It all depends on what the engineer set up. So when you have an engine rotating, let's say clockwise, so if you're looking at the motor, the engine spins in the same direction that the second hand, the minute hand, the hour hand go on a clock. That's clockwise. So it starts at midnight and it starts heading towards 1, 2, 3, right? When we talk about after top dead center, we're not actually talking about the piston moving. We're talking about the connecting rod. As the connecting rod goes up and down, it goes around in circles. And you'll notice that up here, as the piston's at its top, the connecting rod can actually move a little bit, and there won't be any discernible changes in where the piston is inside the cylinder bore. So it's that little movement before top dead center, at top dead center, after top dead center. And then the piston starts dropping away. Pushes up, comes down, pushes up, comes down, pushes up, drops down. So you see the movement of the pen, that there's a movement where the piston gets to the top and the connecting rod is still swiveling through because it's on a much bigger arc, because it's attached to the crankcase, which is wider, and there's more. It describes a larger arc, and with that larger arc, there's a moment where there's actually no movement at the piston top, just moving at the connecting rod. And you want to go after top dead center. So we're talking about points that are usually part of either the intake valves being open and the piston is now on its downward travel to create a vacuum inside of the cylinder, so that fresh air fuel can rush down and in and get ready for the compression stroke. That's one of the 2 strokes that this after top dead center initiates. The other one is that the valves are closed, the gas has been compressed, and now we've had an ignition event, And that ignition event is causing, by way of hot burning gases, creating pressure. That pressure is now pushing down on the piston, and the piston is being forced down. And by forcing the piston down, the piston is attached to the connecting rod, and the connecting rod is pushing on that crankcase to go around the bottom. Like you pedaling your bike, you're pushing down on that pedal so that it comes up on the backside, and then comes up to the top, and you push down again. Same for a piston. The explosion of the air-fuel mixture is its foot pushing down on the piston, which is its pedal, and the connecting rod is that piece of metal that attaches from the pedal to the sprocket. And in this case, the sprocket, the front sprocket, is the crankcase. Or not the crankcase, the crankshaft. That's how it's all connected. The foot of the car is the explosion that gives the pressure to the top of the piston, which is the pedal. The connecting rod is the piece of metal that attaches the pedal down to the sprocket. Okay, it's that piece of metal. So the crankcase, I want to say crankcase a lot. I don't know why. Must be because cases of beer. Yeah. Crankshaft. Yeah, better. Crankshaft. So the crankshaft is the sprocket. And the connecting rod is that metal bar that connects the two. As the connecting rod connects the piston to the crankshaft. Haha, I said it right. All right, so we talked about all that. Why is after top dead center important? After top dead center is when the explosion is now allowed to express itself, the burning air-fuel mixture, as a form of converting thermal energy, which is expanding hot gases, into kinetic energy, the movement of the piston. And this occurs right after A, top T, dead D, center C. ATDC, after top dead center. So that's what that is. The position of the piston once it is moved beyond top dead center. Ta-da! Okay, what else do we got? Aerate and after top dead center. I think that's plenty enough for now. Is there any other side notes that we can talk about? Ooh, I can see the reflections of the computer screen in my glasses. Oh, look at that. And I can see a reflection of my face in my glasses in me. Ah, that's weird. It's like the impossibly long corridor when you take two mirrors and you aim them at each other, and then you can see inside and it looks like a forever hallway. It's like that. It's like the movie Inception. Ooh. All right. So that's all I've got today. Should we talk one more? Aerate after top dead center. Do you want to talk about aftermarket? We can talk about the next letter. All right, hold on. We got to do it the right way. A reading from the Holy Gospel of CDX Automotive. Everyone, please turn to glossaries, pages 1178, 1179. A reading from our Holy Scriptures of horsepower and torque. Aftermarket. The segment of the trade that supplies parts, services, and repair for vehicles outside of the original equipment manufacturer or the dealer network. So, for all of you Autobots who work as a mechanic in a place that is not the dealership. And if you are not actually working at the assembly plants for the cars, you are aftermarket. Now, with the exception of Toyota, and believe me, I know King is right on this one. The exception of, I should say, Toyota and the old aftermarket houses of various manufacturers, and we'll get to this in a minute. You're not going to build an engine with the ability to have as much longevity as the manufacturer itself. There's a caveat to this. There's a caveat. And I'll explain about parts and service and repair and build. When you have aftermarket, let's say you've got a small startup. Let's take me, for example. Romer's Welding, Zen Welding was the name of my welding company before I came to Job Corps. The work I performed was completely dependent on the amount or cost of the job. And let me be frank, even though I'm Kurt. See the play on words? Let me be frank. That means let me be forthright, be truthful. Even though my name is Kurt, which is another way of saying abrupt or short, like an abrupt answer or a very short answer. Very Kurt. Anyway, so it's funny to me. So Zen Welding, I would put in bids on jobs. And let's say I needed the work, and it wasn't for anything medically critical or in the food industry critical, and it was just like a fence job for the town of Chicopee, because they're like that. And I put in a bid, and the bid gets sent back. It's happened twice. The bid gets sent back saying, no, you're in the wrong ballpark. It's got to be a better ballpark. And I was like, really? Okay, more competitive bid. Sure, okay. And I hit him with the low ball number. The absolute minimum when do a job. But that minimum is now predicated on the fact that I know I've read the prospectus for the job. It's an outside job. It's wrought iron gates. It's repair of gates that are broken or repair of the iron fence around a particular cemetery. And so I won the bid. And so now I got to take me and my guys, and we have to go out and we have to do the repair, because we're getting paid at a very exact the winning bid amount. So if I bid the job out at, say, $7,000 to fix X amount of feet of fencing, and one of the things that I found out that townships would do is they would give you an erroneous figure. They would go out and they would measure, like, let's say the town is responsible for maintaining a fence along a frontage line near a cemetery. The town's responsible. So they go out and they have a couple of guys go and they measure it out. And they measure out the big chunks that are like, where someone backed their truck through the fence. And then a couple of kids knocked over another area. They'll measure out those two exact spots and go, okay, 30 feet of fencing need to be repaired. And you go, okay, 30 feet. And they showed pictures of it. It's part of the prospectus. It's part of the pre-bidding process. You get to find out what the job is. As an aftermarket welder, I'm not welding in a machine shop, welding brand new parts for people. I'm welding for my business. And I've already been told that my first bid was far too high and needs to come down to be competitive. Okay. Well, what's going to happen is this: my welding work, the welds themselves are going to be fine. But instead of taking the time that I would build into creating a really good, thoughtful bid, my first bid was $20,000. Why? Because I was going to put down wood planks over the grass so I wouldn't tear up the lawn. I was going to put blankets down so that slag wouldn't mess up some pretty concrete and stone masonry that was there. I was going to grind down using proper flap discs and really create a brand new fence structure. Brand new, make it look pretty. It was going to be great. It was going to be really, really nice. And I was going to clean up everything so that when I left the work site, it was as if I was never there and the fence was always that beautiful. You're not even going to see the damage. It's just beautiful fence. They told me to rebid. I put the rebid in at the absolute lowest. And in their minds, they're still thinking, oh, we're going to get Zen Welding is going to put wood planking down for his trucks. So when he shows up, the grass is going to be nice. No. When I won that lowball bid, get out, literally pulled up the old iron gate, ground off a little bit to get good weld points, welded the old fence right back up with dinks and bends in it. Fence repaired. I even wrote in the new prospectus for the new bid, utilizing old equipment, utilizing any usable fence structure will be recycled and reused. Sure did. I got paid. I paid my boys. They got a fence, and it looked like someone had come in and repaired it. Now the fencing itself, I had somebody come. One of the inspectors was like, "Oh, this is." I was like, I followed my bid. I followed my perspective. I followed what I submitted my paperwork in, and I told you I was going to reuse the fencing. He was, no. So that's aftermarket. You can go two ways with aftermarket. You can go super cheap, or you can go super expensive. Now, when you talk about longevity in an aftermarket scenario, there are tuning companies which did such a great job because the original manufacturer wasn't that great, and the aftermarket process made a better product. Like if they had paid me my original bid, I was going to make my section of the fence look better than the original section of the fence that was on the front of the cemetery. It's going to look much prettier. It's going to look gorgeous. Brand new, shiny, painted shiny. It's going to look great. But as with all things, you get what you pay for, which is what I also said to them. I fulfilled it to a T. I even showed my lawyer. So that's another thing. When you're in your private business, you have a lawyer on retainer. And I showed my lawyer, and I showed him pictures of what I planned on doing, and he was like, "Yep, that's what you do." Not answering a call from Colorado, but I will go. Can't talk now. What's up? Sends the text out. I love it. Anyways, aftermarket. The good, the bad, the ugly. So let's talk about the various aftermarkets for each of the automotive groups. We'll start with one of my first ones. For my Datsun 280Z, 1977 Datsun 280Z that I had, the 76 260Z, and I had another 280 and an older 240, but I didn't get around in the 240 too much. The 280 and the 260 were the runners, of which I really ran the 280Zs a lot. Of which of the 280s, my silver one, I have pictures of it in my Facebook. The one you see with the white rims where I painted them, because we were going through rubber pretty solid, was the one that, and you'll notice it has a little bit of a forward pitch to it, because there's a 351 Cleveland sticking in that motor bay, not the original L28 2.8 liter inline six cylinder that the 280Z originally had. I had a 1970. The 2Zs were 1977 Datsun 280Zs. My dad and I stuck a Ford 351 Cleveland in it. B&W Bob Warner 5-speed tranny at the back end. It was a sloppy build. It was just because we had it laying around there was a whole thing about the engine and the old engine, the original engine burning up, and it's like old fuel injection kind of cracked and spilled fuel everywhere, and that caught fire. And we're like, oh, what are we going to do? And Dad's like, oh, I got a 351 sitting right here. I'm like, okay. I was a kid. I didn't know any better. He gave me very limited. He's like, here's my tools that you can use. Here's the engine. Here's a transmission out of an old Mustang. Make it happen. I was like, 17, new driver's license, and a car. I was all about making that sucker work. And it worked. It was good. We had a good time. It was a very raw car, and not a lot of fit and finish on that particular swap, but it worked. Plus, it was a carbureted car. It was no longer fuel injection. The Cleveland motor was fuel injection. No, excuse me, carbureted. The old L28 was fuel injected. And fuel injection, you need high pressure fuel pumps, you need ECU, you need electrical. There's a lot that went into it. The Cleveland carburetor, add a fuel pump, low pressure, run a hose, hook up your distributor cap and rotor to the battery, well, through a coil, and connect the throttle cable, which we had to fabricate a mount for. But it wasn't a problem. And boom, Bob's your uncle, right? The toughest part was the transmission, because the transmission bell housing walked right up to the backside of the 351. That wasn't a big deal. But the transmission, where it poked through, I had to cut a new hole in my transmission tunnel in the Z car. That was 3 inches that away back. So instead of shifting up here where you normally were, I was shifting back here a little bit, because there was a little apparently in Mustang, whatever year Mustang I pulled the 5-speed out of, the body of the vehicle was longer. Might have been like an aftermarket Thunderbird job or something like that. Maybe even a truck. I don't know. I really don't know where the training came from. Anyways, the 5-speed, the stick ended up going 3, 4, 5 inches further back, which made it feel like my elbow was in the back seat trying to shift. The toughest part of that, believe it or not, was just getting an aftermarket drive shaft connecting a Ford tranny to a Nissan, because Datsun used Nissan parts in their drivetrain, to a Nissan rear diff, an R200. Yeah, the R200 diff. I grabbed it out of a 2+2 that was crushed, and I know the R200 rear end was better, just a better rear end in the Z car, with the same bolt-up patterns and everything for the wings, the little spars that kick out. But that doesn't matter. What the heck was I talking about before my cars? Oh, aftermarket. Right, aftermarket. So there I am, and I hodgepodged a motor. I was aftermarket. I was low-end aftermarket. High-end aftermarket. A great, like the first BMW I had, so I had the first one I had was a 535i, and then I had a 740 IL. The 535 was a Dinan car, Dinan. They went from just doing exhausts to intakes and exhausts to intakes, exhaust camshafts, and computers, the ECUs, remapped ECUs. And they did it so well that Dinan became some sort of a de facto aftermarket way to all. If you owned a 90s 5 and 7 series, you get a Dinan. It's what you did. It's where you went. It's like a Mustang. It's like Roush. Roush has its own racing wing. Or it's like Cheryl Kelby. I said his name wrong. Carroll Shelby. I spoonerize. I apologize. My brain works too quick sometimes. My mouth's slow. Carroll Shelby, not Cheryl Kelby. Carroll Shelby was another one where his aftermarket products were so good, Ford Motor Company said you can have your own line. Your own line of Shelby products within our own house. Who else did that? Oh, AMG. Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes-Benz had an aftermarket group called AMG. They built so well that AMG went in-house. Porsche, Roof. So Porsche had Roof. Roof was so good with revamping 1980s and up into the 90s even Porsches, which, truth be told, and Porsche files will all have their hissy fits, but the fit and finish on mid-80s Porsches was junk, especially in the motors. If you took apart a lot of those early flat sixes were split case jobs. And I think they're all split case jobs. Some of them weren't. Some of them were like attempts at being non-oil cooled. They went to not air cooled, or they were oil cooled. So that's another thing. Everyone's like, "Oh, you got an air cooled Porsche?" No, it's oil cooled, you dunce. Liquid cooled speaks to having a coolant system, and they had a centralized cast. It wasn't a break open cast. It was one where you could actually fit the crankcase through the rear of the housing. You just had to unhook the flywheel from it, and the crank you could push and pull through it. I don't know how they actually did that, but I think they tried it on one model and it failed miserably. So the split crankcase, you'd have to split the crankcase apart to get that central crankshaft out. The flashings that Porsche would leave in, they would just pour the mold, cut the reliefs for the bearings, and then ship it. And so Roof came along and said, man, we could really clean this up and make some horsepower in there. And Roof was notorious. One of the first roofs that they made was called the Yellowbird. The Yellowbird was tremendous. That thing was just, they didn't do much and got like 200 extra horsepower and all kinds of torque. And they lowered it a little bit, and they gave it some stance a little bit. And they made it handle. They did, they upped the game that Porsche put out. And everyone's always like, oh, Porsche is such an amazing man. Roof smacked them around and built one, and they did it so well. Here's the point I was trying to make. Roof did so well that they actually became a company in their own right with access to their own certified VIN numbers. Porsche didn't give them the VIN numbers. The German government gave them some new VIN numbers from Roof to put on the Porsches that they received. Porsche would send them blank chassis, and Roof had their own list of VIN numbers. I always thought that was amazing that an aftermarket group did so well that the original company went, look, you guys doing great. You just have a bunch of these, and you go ahead and put your own VIN numbers on them. We're good. You bought us So basically, Roof was buying the chassis. It wasn't that Porsche was giving the chassis. Roof bought them. My God, they bought the chassis and was able to create their own Porsche roofs, and then sold them as roofs. RUFF, Roof. Das ist ein German. This is a German company. Let me show you its features. I love Jorge Sprague. He's a great guy. What are other companies? Oh, that's another one. Nissan and Datsun. Datsun was the carriage company. They made the bodies, and Nissan made the engines. What other aftermarkets? Jim Cook Racing was for Datsun, but Jim Cook Racing just made aftermarket parts, but they were brilliant. The intake manifolds of original L28 Datsun engines were yucky. The Jim Cook Racing ones, so pretty, so nice. And they all developed power. There was so much power lost that Datsun left so much on the table when they created the all the things that they put on the original Nissan engine. Junk. And you get aftermarkets that just clean up the mess, and they make better products than the company. What's the other one? Oh, Nelson Racing Engines. You want to talk about the epitome of a company making something that just takes the best of... we'll talk about Koenigsegg, too. It takes the best of the engine and just makes it better. Nelson Racing Engines. These places have their own CNC shops. They have their own additive 3D printing. Nelson Racing Engines was the first place to pioneer, and they also got one of those... I'm having an old-time brain moment. When you go to the store, when you go to the office, and you get your own number so that only you can produce an item. So it's your own idea. Whatever that word is, it's escaping me now. It's escaping me in all the languages that I know. But yeah, if you had your own idea, you go to the idea office and you get your own little ID number for that idea. And one of the things that Nelson Racing Engines did was they were the first people to trademark and patent. There we go. Trademark and patent mirror imaged turbos. Up until that point, all turbochargers rotated in a clockwise fashion when looking at the cold side intake. They all spun in the same direction. So if you had a V8 and you wanted to make this turbocharger and this turbocharger, this one would be facing the same way, and it would look odd. So they would clock the turbo, so this one came in this way and this one came in this way, and it made it look not professional. NRE, they literally patented an additive process where both the turbos are now symmetrical and mirror imaged, and it actually improved efficiency like 20%. It was great. It was awesome. Another company to take on that, and they actually, I do know that for like 1 or 2 years they paid the royalties on it, was Koenigsegg. Koenigsegg is another company that has mirror imaged, additive manufactured turbochargers for use on all their cars. Another fun case in point. So the real story, and you guys can look at this, you guys can go watch all of those YouTube videos on Christian von Koenigsegg. The original CCRX used a Ford 302 power plant. The very first car he used a 302 power plant to move his car around and to showcase his car. He always had it in his head that he wanted to build his own engines and transmissions. He always wanted to, but at first, all he could do is make the car itself. The engine and drivetrain and the axles and the wheels, all those things he bought from outside sources. But the body of the car and the interior of the car were his, was Christian von Koenigsegg's design, and he made it in-house. So in a very real sense, he was an aftermarket producer of automobile chassis and bodies on a Ford power plant and drivetrain. So as the CCRX developed, or the CCXR, excuse me, whichever way he had it, developed into the original Agueras, instead of outsourcing a white sheet design, in other words, designing an engine from the ground up, he was like, you know what, this is a great power plant. What can we do to make this engine better, to make more horsepower? And so there began the upward push of the Ford 302 power plant, in which the first thing I think Christian von Koenigsegg did is he got rid of the 302 and moved up to the big block series, which is a 460 engine, but down in displacement. The 460 is an engine for trucks. The variant for automobiles is like a 428. I think back in the day they called it a 428. The 429 was the Cobra Jet, and that was a derivation of the 351 Cleveland that was punched and blueprinted. But it was so the 429 Cobra Jet is a stretched motor. It's at the very ragged edge. It had very thin a cylinder wall. It was just, you guys can read about it. It's the biggest form of the 351 Cleveland you can get. But the 460 platform was the truck engine. Nice big thick walls. It was big, it was iron, it was heavy, but it was indestructible. And it was definitely a 1970s power plant. Well, Christian von Koenigsegg said, well, look, we love the Ford design. Let's take this motor and let's see how far we can go with it. Like, what's the ragged edge? And so what he started doing in-house was he would run the motor and dyno it to its very edge, and he would break it. And then he would go and he would find out what broke. And here comes the brilliant part, as an aftermarket guy, he would then design the broken part as a new part. He designed it with more strength built in, lighter, maybe with a better material, and then he would stick it back in the motor, and then they'd run it right up until a ragged edge, all the horsepower, right, on the dyno, until something else broke. It wouldn't be the thing that broke, it would be the next thing in the line. So maybe the first thing that broke was the piston. So it was like, oh, let's take a look at the pistons. Oh, they're all cast iron pistons. We're going to hyperretetic cast aluminum with shrouds and short skirts on it, which is a real thing. You just look it up. And so they put the brand new super duper awesome piston top on top of the connecting rod, and they put it all back in, and they ran it again. Well, the next thing you know goes a connecting rod. All right, so let's design some high-end connecting rods. So we got titanium, right? And you put the titanium connecting rods in. They stuck it back in the motor. Let's run it again. Crankshaft broke. Whoa, you know what? Yeah, let's design a new crankshaft, micro-balanced, to within 1/1000th of a gram on each spar. So when it spins up, it's completely balanced, and we'll make it a flat plane crank, which you can research somewhere else. Made it a flat plane crank, so it sounded glorious in the exhaust note. And they ran it. Now it's making really good horsepower. But then the journal bearings spun. So we're going to have to redesign these journal bearings. We're going to make them bigger, give them more square inches, and we're going to redesign the oil inlet galleries. We're going to bore those out, and we're going to get its own private dedicated oil line just for that. So we're going to revamp the oil pressuring pump, and we're going to, on top of that, let's redesign the sump. We'll go from a wet sump to a dry sump now. Dry sump means the oil just gets its own pressurized lines to different areas of the motor rather than just one pressurized group of arteries and veins. Now it's got like multiple entry points. And so they would run that engine, and it was making tremendous horsepower, right? Even more than before. And then something else would break. The heads would go. The head gaskets would go. So, you know what? We're going to go from a cam in the engine. So we're going to go to overhead cam now. So we were able to go to overhead cams, and they were going to bolt those heads down with super big studs. And they bolted it all in, and they ran that engine. They're like, oh, we're nearing the edge. We're going through valves and valve springs. So they designed, and honest to God, this is the Christian von Koenigsegg designed, manufactured, and is currently in production of the first engine that does not have camshafts. It's in the Gemera. It's called the free valve system. And he actually sold production rights, or maybe he kept it. No, I think he sold the production rights to it to a Chinese firm so they can use it on an inline 4-cylinder engine that they're producing in China, of which Elon Musk is not Elon, of which now Christian von Koenigsegg is making a tidy dang profit of a type of free valve system that's being used. And it's a test bed. He told them, like, hey, we were designing this thing. You guys want to buy it and run with it, go for it. It might have teething problems. That's not my problem. You guys bought it. But apparently he's worked through the teething problems because it's out on the Gemera. It's amazing. It's a 3-cylinder. The Gemera uses, and here's the interesting part. So the BMW i8 uses a 3-cylinder hybrid technology engine mated to a battery pack, to which I think like top speed's like 120, 130, and it has around 200-mile range or something like that. Real weak. Makes like 180, 190 horsepower. It's not a lot. I put it this way. I'd be lying if I told you what the numbers were. I don't remember. I just know that when I first saw it, I was like, oh, it's a beautiful car. Then I looked at the numbers like, oh my God, it's worse than a Honda Insight. Oh, it's horrible. So bad. So this is how stupid they've gotten over at BMW. Once a great company, now just severely lacking. There is, I kid you not, guys, Autobots, and I don't know how it's engaged or how it's used, but there is the ability to play over the sound system inside of an i8 of a pre-recorded exhaust note from like an M5 or something, one of their M motors, real loud and nasty. They have the ability of playing that when you mash down on the gas pedal to give you the idea that you've got a big engine. To me, that's the OEM equivalent of putting one of those turbo sounds whistles and clipping it onto the back of the exhaust pipe so that when your exhaust blows a lot of hot compressed exhaust gases, it goes so it sounds like a turbo. It doesn't do anything. That's how far BMW has fallen. They play noises, vroom, vroom, like baseball cards on the spokes of a bicycle. In a moment. Well, Christian von Koenigsegg has created the Gemera, of which there's a video down in my fun spots, the fun videos or fun quizzes. A 3-cylinder, twin turbocharged, making 600 horsepower. Hooked up to a battery pack, giving the thing, what is it, 2,000, 2,500 horsepower, 2,000 foot-pounds of torque. Oh my God. Christian von Koenigsegg is the man. Elon Musk was the man. Now he's being weird. Christian's the man. He even looks like a Bond villain. I love that, He looks like Dr. Evil, but he's the nicest guy, And he's making these insanely amazing, and it's a hybrid. It's a hybrid. It's a hypercar hybrid. And did I mention? It's a two-door, four-seater. It's got those Koenigsegg doors that are really long, and they open up that funky dihedral way. Oh, playa. Oh, my God. This thing is sick. 4 big people get in the thing. And it's got luggage room. What? And wait, there's more. It's got the world's first heated and cooled coffee cup holders. What? This car is insanity. I want a car. I want the Gemera. Now he did make an all-out pursuit of top speed perfection called the Jesko and the Jesko Ultimate, which was it's Christian von Koenigsegg's not piece de resistance, but piece de jour, the build of the day in chasing the top speed holy grail, the brass ring. And that keeps moving as other companies step forward. For a minute, Ferrari had it, then Lamborghini had it, then Bugatti came in with the EB110 and the Veyron, and Veyron, Bugatti Veyron, so quick. And a couple months later, Christian von Koenigsegg went, that's nothing. Agera RS, go get that. And it got the top speed record. And then Christian went, that's not fast enough. Hey, 1-1, go get that. New top speed record. And now Christian von Koenigsegg went, look, this is getting ridiculous. I'm going to make one last car to go as fast as you want to possibly go. And I'm calling it the Jesko Ultimate in honor of my dad. Okay. And I won't be chasing the top speed anymore, because it'll be like many things in Job Corps life. They keep moving the goalposts. And so Christian said, look, this is whatever the Jesko does, that's it. We're happy with it. We're getting to the point where the levels of speed are ungodly. Like there are only 4 places on the globe. I didn't say map. I said globe. A handful of places on the globe where the top speeds of these creations can be explored. That's it. And one of them is a Salt Lake. So pursuing these speeds and Christian got it. He understands. He goes, it's a bragging right. We've got the fastest car in the world. So he goes, all right, look, I'll do it this once, and we're gonna really put our effort into making not just the fastest car, but the fastest from like one of the things that he did is, and it's not a kit car. So for him, he wanted to build the fastest 0 to 400 kilometers per hour back to zero again car. Fast. And after that, he's done. There's no reason to go chasing after a car that can go 450 kilometers per hour, 500 kilometers per hour. Where does it stop? You can one off until you're blue in the face, and it won't matter. No matter what you build, someone's going to always build something that goes 1 mile an hour faster. But what he wants to do is build these things that are wicked fast and wicked cool. And that, to me, is the important part. Something drivable, something that anybody can get in and just have a great time in. And Christian does it in spades. He does it hands down better than anyone. Better than anyone. I would. The only thing that someone has game on him equal to or better is Horacio Pagani with his interiors. And that being said, the Koenigsegg's are much more of a normal hypercar with normal, nothing out of the ordinary, and it's just a really good interior. It's very plush. It's got the carbon fiber seats with the Alcantara leather appointments, and it looks like a proper, and the fit and finish is perfect now. The early ones weren't, but now they're just gorgeous. But I had the chance to look at some high-res photos because I've never seen one yet in real life. The interior, I've seen them drive by, but I've seen one at a distance down in New Canaan, a Huayra, and it was a. They're not as big as I thought. Oh, they're small. Like really, they're not that big. But the high res photos that I looked at and the videos that I've seen of the interior of the Huayra, oh my God, it's like a jewelry store in there. The bling levels is outstanding. It all looks like it's artwork. It's he's got the shift gates exposed, the shifting mechanisms exposed because it all looks like a Swiss watch. And it's all chrome and bezeled and buffed aluminum and polished this and all, even the needle faces themselves on the gauges, if it isn't digital with multicolors and it's polished titanium and heat treated aluminum, and it's I can attest that it is the extreme of dedication to detail and artwork for an interior of a car, bar none. Better than Rolls-Royce, better than Bentley, better than Ferrari and Lamborghini, which are jokes compared to the Pagani Huayra. Pagani itself, Pagani interiors are just a thing to behold. Koenigsegg, they're awesome. They're just not. No one's Pagani. I'm sorry. I can argue. Change my mind. Try. You're not going to. Pagani has made the chalice, the cup, the winning trophy of interiors, bar none. Bar none. So much so, and this is the part that I can understand. I would imagine sitting in a Huayra or a Pagan, any kind of Pagani with the interior that it's like, you don't want to touch nothing. I don't want to touch anything. I'm afraid to put a scratch on it or smudge it, and then I gotta take my shirt and get the smudge out, and my hands. I gotta make sure my hands are wide. I gotta take off my shoes. Hold on, because the carpeting in that's like a 3-inch pile carpet, super dense. It's like, and it probably feels like rabbit. It's so soft. I imagine. Everything is just too shiny and too much. I'd be terrified to drive the car. I've got a little bit of sweat on my hands. I can't touch the gorgeous leather steering wheel. Got to put gloves on. Well, all good race car drivers wear gloves. I'm just saying, it's not a Ford pickup truck. It ain't no Yukon, that's for darn sure. And so, aftermarket. There are times when aftermarket production values exceed that of original equipment manufacturers. They're time and time again, you get these companies that take an already amazing product, which you think are tremendous, and they make them better. Now, that being said, can garden variety home-built engines rival what a dedicated production line can put out with their tolerances? No, of course not. Does that mean that an aftermarket creator with a history of winning motors can't build an engine better than what an original equipment manufacturer puts out? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's been done time and time again, where someone has taken a product that people think is just fine and gone, nah, dude, hold my beer. I got this, and I'll show you something. And they make pieces of art. Nelson Racing engines, they have their own, they built them themselves. They have billet engines. Billet aluminum engines. And these are race car engines that come with warranties. What? Nelson Racing engines builds them so well, they go, yeah, you'll get about 5 passes out of that before you got to rebuild it. And if you don't race it, it's good for like 2 years, 24,000 miles. What? Yeah, I know. Well, Chevrolet offers 10-year, 100,000 miles. Trust me, if you they also have callbacks and TSBs and all kinds of problems. I'm sure that if Nelson Racing Engines put together a longevity motor, something that just made 800 horsepower all day long, they'd be able to do it, and it would be better than anything that Chevrolet or Dodge put out. That's the truth. That's it. Just because I know what the quality is like out of a Nelson Racing engine. You watch in their videos, you see them where they're manufactured. These guys are sticklers for hundreds of thousands of an inch. Not just hundreds of an inch that you'd get out of a dealership or a manufacturer. Hundreds of thousands of an inch. Not just hundreds of thousands of an inch. That's how stickler these guys are. So if you give me a bunch of dudes that are playing with hundreds of thousands of an inch and they consistently make motors that make insane horsepower and hold together for insane amounts of time, oh, absolutely they can make better cars, better vehicles. And here's the rub, though. Money, 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 money. Money. It all boils down to money. You will hear King and I often talk about you can have it cheap, you can have it reliable, you can have it fast, but you can only choose two. You can only pick two. You want it cheap and fast? It won't be reliable. You want it reliable and fast? It won't be cheap. You want it cheap and reliable? No problem. It won't be fast. You can have it cheap. You can have it reliable. You can have it fast. Pick two. High five.